Sean stood by the massive window of his seaside mansion, gazing out at the restless waves that mirrored the storm within him. The luxury that surrounded him, a grand piano collecting dust in the corner, chandeliers reflecting dim light, and a gallery of framed family photos, felt hollow. His existence had been reduced to a ritual of loneliness, a cycle of memories replaying endlessly. It had been 15 years since the tsunami took his world away, leaving him a shadow of the man he once was. His hand trembled as he picked up a photo from the mantel. Daisy, with her golden hair and mischievous smile, sat perched on his lap. His wife stood beside them, her eyes full of love. That vacation was supposed to strengthen their bond, a reward for years of hard work. Instead, it became the backdrop to a nightmare he couldn't escape. Sean closed his eyes, and the memories surged. He could still hear the distant warning sirens blending with the roar of the waves. The beach had been bustling with laughter and joy. In an instant, it was chaos. The sky darkened, and the sea rose, a monstrous wall of water swallowing everything in its path. He had clung to Daisy's tiny hand as they ran, his wife struggling to keep up, but the water was relentless. It tore them apart, dragging him under its cold grip. When he regained consciousness, he was in a makeshift rescue shelter, surrounded by strangers. Desperation clawed at his chest as he shouted for his family. Days turned into weeks, and every search ended in bitter disappointment. Rescue teams found no trace of Daisy or his wife. Officials eventually declared them deceased, offering condolences Sean refused to accept. He clung to hope, financing private searches and scouring records. But after months of fruitless efforts, even hope began to wane. Back in the present, Sean placed the photo back on the mantel, his eyes wet with unshed tears. The years had been cruel, transforming him into a recluse. His mansion was both a fortress and a prison. He rarely entertained visitors, save for the staff who maintained the estate. His solace came in fleeting moments, walking along the shoreline, listening to the waves, and feeling the sand beneath his feet. It was there, at the edge of the ocean, that he felt closest to them. That morning, the sky was overcast, and a brisk wind carried the scent of salt and rain. Sean stepped outside, clutching his overcoat tightly as he descended the stone steps to the beach. The tide had receded, leaving behind scattered debris. He wandered aimlessly, his mind clouded by the weight of his grief. Each step seemed heavier than the last as memories flooded back. Daisy building sandcastles, her laughter ringing out over the waves, his wife teasing him for wearing socks on the beach. A sharp pang of longing gripped him, but he kept walking. As he reached a cluster of driftwood, something caught his eye, a glint of glass protruding from the sand. He bent down, brushing away the grains to reveal a weathered bottle, its surface etched with the marks of time. Inside, a piece of paper was tightly rolled, sealed with a delicate wax imprint. Sean's heart raced. He hadn't felt this kind of curiosity, this spark of life, in years. He hurried back to the mansion, the bottle clutched tightly in his hand. Settling into his study, he carefully pried open the wax seal and unrolled the paper. The handwriting was childish, the letters uneven and full of innocence. He froze as he read the words. "If anyone finds this, tell my daddy I love him. Love, your little Daisy." The room blurred as tears streamed down his face. He recognized the writing immediately. It was Daisy's. He remembered her sitting at the beach, giggling as she scribbled something on paper, saying it was a secret message. He had laughed, thinking it was just another of her playful games. But now, holding it in his hands, he realized it was so much more. Sean's chest heaved with sobs, a mixture of anguish and hope. For years he had prayed for a sign, something to tell him that Daisy hadn't been lost entirely. This message, preserved against all odds, was proof that she had been there, that she had thought of him in her final moments, or perhaps that she was still out there somewhere. The questions swirled in his mind. How had the bottle survived all these years? Where had it traveled? And most importantly, could it mean that Daisy had survived? For the first time in years, Sean felt something other than despair. He felt the stirrings of purpose, the faint but undeniable whisper of hope. He vowed to uncover the truth, no matter how impossible it seemed. Sean paced his study, the fragile piece of paper trembling in his hands. He couldn't take his eyes off Daisy's message. The childish scrawl, the affectionate tone, it was undeniably hers. His mind raced with questions, each one louder than the last. Could this be a cruel coincidence? Or had fate preserved this note for him to find now, 15 years later? He placed the paper gently on his desk, smoothing it out as if afraid it might crumble. Next to it lay the glass bottle, worn and weathered by its journey through time. It was extraordinary that it had survived. He marveled at the wax seal, still intact, its imprint faint but discernible, a simple swirl that Daisy had probably improvised with her tiny fingers. Unable to sit still, Sean grabbed a magnifying glass from the drawer. He examined the bottle, noting scratches and chips that hinted at its long voyage. The paper inside bore no water stains, a testament to Daisy's careful sealing. He turned the bottle over and found faint marks on the bottom, perhaps symbols left by its maker. They were too worn to decipher, but they added to the mystery. Sean's thoughts drifted to the day Daisy must have written the note. He remembered her sitting cross-legged on the sand, humming a tune as she scribbled with a stubby pencil. She had insisted he look away, calling it her secret project. When she finally handed him the bottle, she had giggled and told him, "Someday, someone will find this and know I was here." At the time, he had laughed, kissed her head, and played along. The memory burned brighter now, every detail sharper. What if the bottle had washed ashore somewhere close? Could it mean that Daisy had been alive after the tsunami? Had she been waiting for him all these years, perhaps unable to return? Driven by this hope, Sean turned to action. He reached for his phone and called Charles, a trusted associate who had overseen many of his personal investigations in the past. Charles answered on the second ring, his voice steady and professional. "I need you to come to the house," Sean said without preamble. "There's something urgent." "I'll explain when you're here." "Of course, sir," Charles replied. "I'll be there shortly." As Sean hung up, he glanced back at the bottle and the note. He could feel the beginnings of something stirring within him, a determination that had lain dormant for too long. For years, he had buried his pain in the routine of an empty life, convincing himself there was nothing left to fight for. But now, Daisy's words reignited a flame he thought had been extinguished. When Charles arrived, Sean wasted no time. He laid out the bottle and the note, recounting how he had found them on the beach that morning. Charles listened intently, his sharp eyes scanning the items before him. He was a man of precision, someone who thrived on solving puzzles, and Sean trusted him implicitly. "This is remarkable," Charles said, picking up the bottle with gloved hands. "The condition of the wax and paper suggests it's been preserved for years. But the real question is where it's been all this time." "That's what I need you to find out," Sean said. "I want to know everything. Where the currents might have carried it, how it ended up back here, and if there's any chance it means Daisy survived." Charles nodded. "I'll start by contacting an oceanographic expert. They can map the currents from the time of the tsunami and estimate the bottle's possible trajectory. I'll also reach out to local fishermen and beachcombers to see if they've encountered anything similar." "Good," Sean said, his tone firm. "Money is no object. I want answers." Charles's expression softened slightly. "I understand, sir. We'll get to the bottom of this." As the investigator left to begin his work, Sean returned to the beach. The sky had cleared and sunlight danced on the waves, but his focus remained on the horizon. He felt an odd sense of connection to the bottle, as if it were a lifeline thrown to him from the past. It wasn't just an object. It was a promise, a reminder that Daisy had loved him deeply, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was still out there. That night, Sean sat in his study, unable to sleep. The note lay before him, and he read it over and over, committing every curve of Daisy's handwriting to memory. He allowed himself to dream for the first time in years, not of riches or success, but of a reunion he had longed for with every fiber of his being. In his dream, Daisy's laughter echoed through the mansion, her voice calling out to him as she ran down the hallways. He could see her bright smile, hear her tiny footsteps, feel her small arms wrapping around him in a hug. When he awoke, tears streamed down his face. The dream had been so vivid, so real, that he had to remind himself it was only a memory reborn in his longing. Sean rose and looked out at the ocean, his resolve hardening. He would follow this trail wherever it led. Daisy's message had survived the impossible. Now, it was his turn to do the same. Sean sat in his study as the faint hum of the ocean filtered through the windows. Charles had been working tirelessly, and reports were beginning to trickle in. The meticulous investigator had enlisted oceanographers, marine biologists, and even local historians to piece together the possible journey of the bottle. Maps sprawled across the study's table, marked with lines and circles that represented currents, possible storm paths, and coastal settlements. "It's incredible," Charles said during their latest briefing, pointing to a map dotted with annotations. Given the strength of the tsunami and the complexity of ocean currents, the bottle could have traveled thousands of miles before returning here. Sean's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. "But what does it mean? Where do we start?" Charles paused, his expression thoughtful. One lead stands out. Survivors from the tsunami were rescued by various boats, some documented and others not. There's evidence suggesting a group of survivors was taken to a remote fishing village further along the coast. One of the rescuers mentioned a girl who matched Daisy's age, but she had no identification and couldn't remember anything. Sean's heart skipped a beat. And what happened to her? She was reportedly adopted by the villagers and raised there. Records are scarce, but it's worth investigating. Without hesitation, Sean ordered his private jet prepared. The thought that Daisy might have been among those rescued ignited a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in years. For too long, he had been paralyzed by grief, but now, action consumed him. Days later, Sean and Charles arrived at the small, unassuming village nestled along a rugged coastline. It was a place that time seemed to have forgotten, with weathered boats lining the harbor and simple homes scattered along the hills. Children played barefoot in the streets, their laughter carrying on the wind. The scene was eerily reminiscent of the life Sean had lost, and his heart ached with a mixture of hope and fear. The village elder, an amiable man with kind eyes and a weathered face, greeted them. Through Charles, who acted as a translator, Sean explained his purpose. "We're looking for information about survivors from the tsunami 15 years ago," Charles said. "Specifically, a young girl who might have been taken in by your community." The elder nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "There was such a girl. She was found alone on the beach, clutching a small shell in her hand. She couldn't tell us her name or where she came from, but we took her in. She stayed here for many years before moving on to a nearby town." Sean's breath caught. "Do you remember anything else? Anything at all?" The elder motioned for them to follow. He led them to a small community hall, where a collection of old photos and records was displayed. Among them was a faded picture of a group of children standing by the harbor. Sean's eyes immediately fell on a young girl with golden hair, her expression solemn but unmistakably familiar. "That's her," Sean whispered, his voice breaking. "That's Daisy." The elder smiled gently. She was a quiet child, but she had a strong spirit. She helped with the fishing and learned quickly. We gave her the name Anna, and she became part of our family. Charles leaned closer to the elder. "You mentioned she moved to another town. Do you know where she might be now?" The elder pointed to a small dot on the map they had brought. "She went there to work in the markets. If she is still nearby, you may find her there." Sean clutched the photo tightly as they left. The image of Daisy, Anna, was burned into his mind. She had survived. Against all odds, she had made it. But why hadn't she remembered him? Why hadn't she come back? Questions swirled, but there was no time to dwell. He needed to find her. The next morning, Sean and Charles arrived in the neighboring town, a bustling place where the sounds of commerce and chatter filled the air. The market was a maze of stalls overflowing with colorful produce, freshly caught fish, and handmade goods. Sean's heart raced as he scanned the faces in the crowd, searching for the girl who had haunted his dreams for years. Then, he saw her. She was tending to a stall, her hands moving deftly as she arranged baskets of fruit. Her golden hair, tied back in a simple braid, glinted in the sunlight. She had grown into a young woman, but her features, her eyes, her smile, were unmistakable. Sean froze, unable to breathe. It was her. It was Daisy. "Anna," Charles whispered, nudging him forward. "You need to speak to her." Sean approached slowly, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. When he was close enough to see the faint freckles on her cheeks, he cleared his throat. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was silence, a charged stillness that seemed to stretch for eternity. "Anna," Sean said softly, his voice trembling. "Do you know who I am?" Her brow furrowed, and she tilted her head. "I'm sorry," she said hesitantly. "Have we met?" Sean's heart shattered and soared simultaneously. She didn't recognize him, but she was here, alive and standing before him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the note she had written all those years ago. "This," he said, holding it out to her. "You wrote this. It's your handwriting." Anna took the paper, her expression curious. As her eyes scanned the words, her face changed, confusion, disbelief, and then something deeper. She looked back at Sean, her hands trembling. I don't understand," she murmured. "How could I have written this?" "It's a long story," Sean said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I believe you're my daughter." Anna clutched the weathered note in her hands, her eyes darting between the message and the stranger standing before her. The words on the paper felt familiar, as though they had been etched somewhere deep within her. Yet she couldn't fully grasp their significance. Her brow furrowed as she tried to reconcile the emotions swirling in her chest: curiosity, unease, and a faint, inexplicable warmth. "I don't remember writing this," she said softly, her voice tinged with frustration. "But it feels like something I might have written. How is that possible?" Sean's heart ached as he watched her struggle. This young woman, standing mere inches away, was unmistakably his Daisy, but the years had created a chasm between them. He forced himself to remain calm, knowing he couldn't overwhelm her. "I know this is a lot to take in," Sean said gently, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But I believe you're my daughter, Daisy. 15 years ago, we were separated during the tsunami. I've spent every moment since searching for you." Anna took a step back, the intensity of his words making her heart pound. "I don't remember a tsunami," she murmured, shaking her head. "I grew up in a small village. They found me on the beach when I was little. They said I had no memory of where I came from." Sean's gaze softened, and he took a deep breath. "It makes sense," he said. "Trauma like that, it can do things to the mind. It can make you forget to protect you from the pain." Anna looked at him, her confusion evident. "If what you're saying is true, why did it take so long for you to find me?" The question hit Sean like a blow, but he refused to shy away. "I tried," he said, his voice breaking. "I tried everything. I funded searches, hired investigators, and combed through every piece of evidence I could find. But the world is vast, and the sea hides its secrets well. This," he gestured to the note, "is the first clue I've had in years." Anna stared at the note again, her fingers brushing over the faded handwriting. She wanted to believe him. Something deep within her wanted to reach out and embrace the man before her, but doubt lingered. The stall owner, an older woman who had been silently observing the exchange, approached. "Anna," she said kindly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've always wondered where you came from, haven't you? Maybe it's time you found out." Anna nodded hesitantly. "But how? How can I be sure?" Sean stepped forward, his voice firm. "We can do a DNA test. It will prove the truth." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she finally nodded. "All right," she said, "if that's what it takes." Let's do it. 2 days later, Sean and Anna sat side by side in a small clinic. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sean's heart raced, each second feeling like an eternity. He stole glances at Anna, marveling at how much she resembled her mother. The same golden hair, the same determined set of her jaw. Anna, on the other hand, kept her gaze fixed on her hands, twisting them nervously. She had agreed to the test, but the reality of it all was overwhelming. If Sean was right, her entire identity would be upended. The people who had raised her, the life she had built, it would all feel like a lie. Finally, the door opened, and a nurse entered with an envelope in her hands. She smiled politely, but Sean could see the weight of what she carried in her expression. "We have the results," the nurse said, handing the envelope to Sean. His fingers trembled as he opened it. For a moment, he couldn't bring himself to read the words. Then, he took a deep breath and scanned the document. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at Anna. "It's true," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're my daughter." Anna's breath hitched, and she stared at him, her mind racing. She wanted to feel joy, relief, something, but all she could manage was numbness. The revelation was too big, too life-altering to process in an instant. Sean reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them. "Anna, Daisy, I've dreamed of this moment for so long. I know it's overwhelming, but I want you to know that I've never stopped loving you, not for a single second." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're my daughter," Sean said firmly, "but more than that, you're whoever you choose to be. We can take this one step at a time, together." Anna nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "I think I need time," she said. It's a lot." "Of course," Sean said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." That evening, back at the market, Anna sat alone on a wooden bench, staring at the ocean. The waves rolled in and out, their rhythm steady and soothing. She clutched the photo Sean had given her, the one of her younger self standing in the village, and tried to reconcile it with the man's words. A part of her wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of the life she had always known, but another part of her, one she hadn't felt before, urged her to step into the unknown, to embrace the possibility of something more. As she sat there, the sun dipping below the horizon, she whispered to herself, Maybe I'll let him show me." Sean's heart was heavy with uncertainty as he stood outside Anna's small apartment the following morning. He had respected her request for space, but every hour away from her felt unbearable. The note, the DNA test, the photo, everything pointed to the truth. But he knew the journey ahead would not be simple. Trust and connection couldn't be rebuilt overnight. After a moment of hesitation, he knocked gently on the door. He heard soft footsteps, and then Anna appeared, her face a mixture of exhaustion and cautious curiosity. "I hope I'm not intruding," Sean said, his voice kind but tentative. I wanted to check on you." Anna stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. Her apartment was modest but tidy, filled with simple furnishings and personal touches. On the windowsill, a row of small plants basked in the morning light. It was a stark contrast to Sean's opulent mansion, yet it felt warm and inviting. "I was thinking about everything," Anna began as she took a seat at the small table in the corner of the room. "About what you said, about who I might be. It's overwhelming." Sean nodded, sitting across from her. "I can't imagine what you're feeling right now, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need, we'll face it together." Anna studied him, her gaze searching. "You seem so sure about this. About me. But I feel like I'm two different people now. The one I've always been, and this Daisy person you say I am. You're still you," Sean said gently. "Nothing can change that. But I believe Daisy is a part of you, even if you don't remember her. And I'd like to help you rediscover her, if you'll let me." Anna hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I don't know where to start." Sean's face softened, and he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small photo album. "I brought this," he said, sliding it across the table. "It's full of memories. Of you. Of us." Anna opened the album hesitantly. The first photo was of a much younger Sean, holding a giggling little girl on his shoulders. The joy in his eyes was undeniable. As she flipped through the pages, more images appeared. Daisy with a face full of cake on her birthday, Daisy building sandcastles, Daisy holding a small stuffed rabbit. "That rabbit," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It looks familiar." Sean leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "You used to carry it everywhere. You called it Bunny. I kept it after the tsunami. It's still in your room, waiting for you." Anna closed the album, her hands trembling. "It's like pieces of a puzzle," she said. "I can see the shapes, but they don't fit yet." Sean nodded, his expression understanding. "That's okay. The pieces will come together when you're ready." A week passed, and Anna slowly began to let Sean into her life. They spent time walking along the beach, where he shared stories of her childhood. She listened intently, her guarded demeanor softening as fragments of familiarity surfaced. One evening, Sean invited her to his mansion. "I want to show you something," he said. "It's important." Anna hesitated but eventually agreed. When they arrived, she was struck by the sheer scale of the estate, the towering gates, the sprawling gardens, the grandeur of the mansion. It was overwhelming. "This place," she said softly, "it feels strange." "It's where you grew up," Sean explained as he led her inside. "I've kept it just as it was, waiting for you to come home." He guided her to a room on the second floor, pausing at the door. "This was your room," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I haven't changed a thing." Anna stepped inside, and her breath caught. The walls were painted a soft yellow, adorned with drawings and posters. A small bed sat against the wall, its covers neatly arranged. On the nightstand lay a worn stuffed rabbit, Bunny. She picked it up, her fingers brushing against the faded fabric. A wave of emotion surged through her, bringing tears to her eyes. "I remember this," she said, clutching the rabbit to her chest. "I don't know how, but I do." Sean watched her, tears streaming down his own face. "You don't know how much this means to me," he said. "To see you here, holding that again, it's more than I ever hoped for." Anna turned to him, her voice trembling. "I don't have all the memories, but I feel something, like I belong here." "You do," Sean said, stepping closer. "You always have." That night, they sat together in the living room, the photo album open between them. Anna asked questions about her mother, about the life they had shared before the tsunami. Sean answered patiently, his words painting vivid pictures of a life filled with love and laughter. But as the conversation went on, Anna's expression grew troubled. "What about my mother?" she asked. "Do you think she could still be alive?" Sean's heart sank. He had asked himself the same question countless times, but he had no answers. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've searched for her too, but there's been no trace. It's possible, but I don't want to give you false hope." Anna nodded, her eyes downcast. "It's just, if I survived, maybe she did too." "It's something to hold on to," Sean said gently. "But for now, let's focus on what we've found. We have each other." Anna looked at him, a small smile breaking through her uncertainty. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on me." "I never could," Sean replied. "You're my daughter. Nothing will ever change that." Sean and Anna stood side by side on the expansive balcony of his mansion, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows across the garden below. The weight of the past weeks, the revelations, the tears, the rediscovery, hung in the air. But so did something else, a fragile sense of hope. Anna leaned on the railing, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its rhythm steady and unchanging, like a silent witness to her journey. "It's strange," she said, her voice soft. I spent so much of my life wondering where I came from, and now that I know, it feels overwhelming. Sean turned to her, his expression gentle. You've been through so much, more than anyone should have to endure. But you're here now, and that's what matters. Anna glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. I don't know if I'll ever remember everything, but I feel like I'm starting to understand who I am. That's all I've ever wanted for you, Sean said. To have the chance to be yourself, without the shadows of the past holding you back. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the waves below filling the void. Then, Anna straightened and turned to face him. There's one more thing I need to know, she said, about my mother. If there's even a chance she's out there, I have to try to find her. Sean's chest tightened. He had feared this moment, knowing how delicate the situation was. But he also understood her need for closure. I'll help you, he said. We'll look together, no matter how long it takes. Anna's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, taking his hand. Thank you, she said, for everything. In the following days, they began planning their search. Sean contacted his network of investigators, instructing them to revisit every lead they had ever pursued regarding his wife's disappearance. Anna, now fully invested in uncovering the truth, insisted on being involved in every step. The process was slow and filled with obstacles. Many records from the tsunami were incomplete or lost, and survivors' accounts were fragmented and conflicting. But for the first time in years, Sean felt a renewed sense of purpose, fueled by Anna's determination and resilience. Their bond deepened as they worked together. Anna began to embrace her identity as Daisy, even while holding on to the life she had built in the village. She shared stories of her upbringing, her love for the ocean, and the small but meaningful traditions she had grown up with. In turn, Sean opened up about his grief, his guilt, and the unyielding hope that had kept him going all these years. One evening, as they sorted through old documents in the study, Anna came across a faded photograph. It was of her mother, smiling brightly as she held a seashell up to the camera. Anna stared at the image, her heart aching with longing. She looked so happy, she murmured. She was, Sean said, his voice thick with emotion, and so were we. Anna placed the photo carefully on the desk, her resolve hardening. We'll find her, she said. I can feel it. Sean nodded, his heart swelling with pride. We will. A month later, they stood together on the beach near the mansion, watching the waves roll in under a sky painted with the colors of dawn. The search for Anna's mother was just beginning, but they had already come so far. The once empty mansion now felt alive again, filled with laughter, conversation, and the hope of a brighter future. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Sean turned to Anna. This is where it all started, he said, and this is where we begin again. Anna smiled, the weight of her past lifting with each breath of the salty air. Thank you, she said, her voice steady, for never giving up on me. I couldn't, Sean replied. You're my daughter, and now we're a family again. As they walked along the shore, the ocean lapping at their feet, Sean felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Together, they faced the horizon, ready to embrace whatever came next. Like, subscribe, and share to help me grow.